Picture this. You're absolutely starving. Your children haven't eaten in 3 days. You're standing in the bitter cold holding the only thing of value you have left, your dead husband's wedding ring. Shopkeeper takes one look at it and laughs in your face. What would you do? What happened next in this true story from 1874 will restore your faith in humanity completely. Right. Let me paint you a proper picture of just how brutal this winter was. We're talking about 1874, deep in the American frontier, where winter wasn't just cold, it was a killer. Snow piled so high it swallowed entire fences, and the wind cut through your clothes like it had a personal grudge against you. This wasn't your modern winter where you pop down to Tesco when you're peckish. No, this was survival mode, and Jessie Mae Carter was losing the battle. Jessie was a young widow with 3 little ones clinging to her skirts. Ella, just 8 years old, but trying to be brave for her mom. 6-year-old Sammy, shivering despite his woolly hat pulled down over his ears. And tiny Molly, only 3, barely able to stand from hunger and exhaustion. Jessie herself was a right state. Her boots were cracked, her shawl threadbare, and she hadn't eaten properly in days just so her children might have a few more crumbs. Now here's the heartbreaking bit. Jessie clutched that wedding ring, the last reminder of her husband, the last piece of her old life, and she knew what she had to do. Imagine having to sell the symbol of your greatest love just to keep your babies from starving. The shame of it was eating her alive, but desperation makes you do things you never thought possible. So there she stood, outside the local shop, her breath forming little clouds in the freezing air, working up the courage to go inside. When she finally pushed through that door, the warmth hit her like a slap, but not the good kind, just reminded her how cold and desperate she'd become. The shopkeeper, a right nasty piece of work with a bristly beard and a heart to match, barely glanced at the ring when she held it out with trembling fingers. "Please," she whispered, and you could hear the desperation cracking her voice. "My children haven't eaten in 3 days. Will you buy it?" In this absolute toad of a man. He looked at this precious ring, looked at this starving woman and her babies, and do you know what he said? He smirked, actually smirked tanned. Told her it wasn't worth a loaf of bread, not to him anyway. Then he turned his back on her like she was nothing. It gets worse. There were these 2 women outside, proper gossipy types, and they started whispering loud enough for Jessie to hear every poisonous word. One called her used up, the other said she was shameless for begging in broad daylight. Can you imagine? This poor woman is watching her children waste away, and these heartless cows are making it about her character. Jessie's face burned with shame, even as the wind froze her tears. She wanted to disappear, to gather her little ones and vanish into the snow forever. But then little Ella squeezed her hands so tight, and Jessie could see the silent plea in her daughter's eyes. Not for pride, not for dignity, but for food, for hope, for life. So Jessie tried once more, her voice breaking as she explained it was her wedding ring, surely worth something. And this shopkeeper god? What a piece of work. He just snorted and told her to keep it as a memory, because no man would pay good money for something tied to another man's failure. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Now, here's where our story takes a turn that'll give you proper goosebumps. From the shadows of the boardwalk stepped a figure that nobody expected to see. Alex Boone was what you'd call a mountain of a mantle, broad-shouldered, weathered by years of living alone up in the hills. He'd lost his own wife to winter's back, and grief had carved lines into his face that spoke of storms both outside and within. But here's the thing about Alex. He wasn't known for grand gestures or flowery words. He was the strong, silent type who lived by actions rather than promises. And when his gray eyes took in the silent Jessie clutching that ring, the children shivering, the gossiping women, the dismissive shopkeeper, something in his expression shifted. "How long since they ate?" he asked, and his voice cut through all that nastiness like an axe-splitting wood. Jessie's throat closed up. Admitting the truth felt like laying her soul bare for everyone to trample. But finally, she managed to whisper, 3 days. Now, what Alex did next is the kind of thing that makes you believe in the goodness of people again. Without another word, he walked straight past her into the diner across the street.
Ouch.
Just like that, the bell above the door jangled, and everyone stood there gawping, wondering what on earth was happening.
Oh.
She'd been expecting another rejection, another cruel word. But instead, this stranger had just ... acted. She hesitated, pride warring with desperation, but hunger won out, and she followed him inside with her children pressed close. The warmth of that diner hit them like a blessing. Proper warmth, the kind that seeps into your bones and reminds you what it feels like to be human again. The children's eyes went wide at the sight of lamplight and the smell of actual food, bacon grease and coffee, and all the wonderful sense of a world they'd almost forgotten existed. The whole diner was buzzing with whispers, of course. People muttering about Boone taking up with a beggar and wondering what he was playing at. Jessie heard every cruel word, each one like a needle in her heart, and she started to rise, ready to flee with her children before she brought more shame on this kind stranger. But Alex's voice stopped her cold. "They're eating," he said aloud, not looking at anyone else, just stating it as a simple fact. As if the basic human decency of feeding hungry children was enough to silence all judgment. And you know what? For a moment it actually was. When the bowls were empty and the children drowsy with warmth and full bellies, Jessie tried to leave. The shame and gratitude were warring inside her, and she didn't know how to balance them. But Alex's hand reached across the table, not touching hers, but close enough to make his meaning clear. "Snow's heavy tonight," he said quietly. "My cabin's near. You'll freeze out here." Now, this was the moment that changed everything. Jessie stood at the crossroads between desperation and hope, between the known misery of the streets and the terrifying unknown of trusting a stranger. She looked at her children, Ella's weary determination, Sammy's fragile hope, little Molly already nodding off in exhaustion, and she made a choice that would reshape all their lives. Through the storm and darkness, Alex led them to his cabin, a weathered but solid refuge with smoke curling from its chimney. Inside, warmth and the scent of wood smoke enveloped them like a embrace. Alex moved with quiet efficiency, laying out blankets by the fire, serving more food, creating a space where these broken souls could begin to heal. But here's what makes this story truly special. This wasn't just about one night's shelter or one hot meal. Over the days that followed, as snow piled high against the cabin walls, something deeper began to grow. Not just gratitude or obligation, but genuine connection between two people who'd both known the deep ache of loss. The children began to thrive. Ella helped Alex with daily chores, her small arms straining as she carried water, but her face bright with purpose. Sammy followed him like a devoted shadow, drinking in every word and gesture. And little Molly, precious little Molly, started calling him Pa, in a voice so sweet it could melt the hardest heart. Of course, the town gossips had a field day with it all. People shaking their heads and muttering about how the beggar woman would ruin poor Alex Boone. But when the talk got particularly vicious, Alex did something that left everyone speechless. He walked right up to where the loudest voices were gathered and made a declaration that rang through the streets like a bell. "Jessie May Carter and her children are under my roof," he said, his voice steady as granite. "I'll not be harmed, nor starve, nor freeze. Say what you will of me, but they'll have my protection." The silence that followed was deafening. No one dared meet his eyes as he turned and walked away, his boots striking the wooden planks like thunder. When Jessie heard about it later, she was mortified. The shame burned through her like fire, and she tried to pack their few belongings to spare him further disgrace. Alex stopped her, with just a gentle hand against the door, and words that would echo in her heart forever. "The fire's warm inside," he said quietly. "Don't step into the cold." That simple touch, no more than a whisper of contact, bound her more securely than any chain ever could. But fear is a persistent beast, and one terrible night when the storm raged at its fiercest, Jessie's terrors overwhelmed her completely. Convinced she was destroying Alex's life, she tried to slip away with her children into the deadly blizzard. The wind tore at them, the snow blinded them, and within moments they were lost and freezing in the darkness. Then came Alex's voice cutting through the storm like a lifeline, fierce and desperate. He charged into that blizzard without hesitation, lantern held high. And when he found them, he pulled Jessie against his chest with trembling hands. "You'll die out here," he said, and his voice was breaking with more than just cold. Through her tears, Jessie confessed her deepest fear that she was ruining him, that the town's laughter would destroy everything he'd worked for. But Alex's response was everything she needed to hear, and more. "Let them laugh," he whispered fiercely, his hand cradling the back of her head. "No more running. You and these children. You're mine to keep safe now." In that moment, surrounded by the howling storm, but sheltered in his arms. Jesse finally understood what belonging felt like again. When dawn broke, pale and quiet after the blizzard's rage, something beautiful happened. The town gathered in the little chapel, and there, without ribbons or lace or any fancy trappings, Alex and Jesse spoke their vows. Simple words, steady voices, and 3 children holding tight to their hands. It wasn't desperation that brought them together anymore, it was dignity newly born. Love earned through hardship, and the unshakable foundation of mutual respect. The gossip fell silent, replaced by something far more powerful than scorn. Respect, recognition that sometimes love arrives not with fanfare, but with quiet acts of grace, extended hands in storms, fires built in silence, and vows whispered not before crowds, but before God and the wind itself. Jesse's wedding ring, the one she'd tried so desperately to sell, now gleamed on her finger again, brighter for all it had survived. The children's laughter rang out beneath the chapel eaves, their voices carrying like bells over the snow-covered landscape. So here's what this incredible true story teaches us. Love doesn't always announce itself with thunderous applause or grand romantic gestures. Sometimes it shows up quietly, unexpectedly, in the form of a stranger who sees your need and acts without question. Sometimes it's the steady presence of someone willing to stand beside you when the whole world seems to be whispering cruel judgments. Alex Boone could have walked past that struggling family like everyone else did. He could have minded his own business, avoided the gossip, kept his comfortable solitude intact. But instead, he chose compassion over convenience, action over apathy, and in doing so, he didn't just save for lives, he created something beautiful and lasting. Remember this story when the world seems full of heartless shopkeepers and cruel gossips? Remember that there are still Alex Boones out there, people who'll step out of the shadows when you need them most. And maybe, just maybe, you can be that person for someone else who's standing in the cold, holding their last precious thing, wondering if anyone in this world still cares. If this story moved you the way it moved me, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to. Until next time. Remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply extend your hand to someone who's lost in the storm. You never know, you might just be saving more than one life. You might be creating a love story for the ages.